Welcome to the Prevention Leaders Podcast, the place where passion meets purpose and where the stories we share help illuminate the path to more effective prevention efforts. I'm your host, Dave Closson, here with another episode that promises to not only enlighten, but inspire every one of our listeners. Today, we are incredibly fortunate to have Susie Reece with us, a champion in the field of suicide prevention and a powerhouse of advocacy and inspiration. If you've ever wondered about the impact of lived experiences on prevention strategies, or how personal stories can transform public discourse and policy, this episode is for you. So Susie brings a unique perspective shaped by profound personal loss and a rich background in the challenges and changes that come with being in a military family. And through her work, Susie has turned her trials into transformative tools that aid others in navigating the complexities of mental health challenges. In our conversation today, we will explore Susie's personal journey from tragic loss of her father to finding her calling in suicide prevention. We'll talk about the power of lived experience and how personal history informs professional advocacy and the development of best practices in mental health. We'll also talk about breaking stigmas, the importance of open conversations about mental health, suicide prevention, and the way these discussions can lead to real change. We'll also talk about cultural sensitivity and how Susie navigated the dual challenges of her cultural identity and the stereotypes surrounding her upbringing in a predominantly white rural community. We'll also dive into the practicalities of prevention work, what does and what doesn't work, how best practices are developed, and the critical role of community and communication in our field. So whether you're a professional in the mental health and prevention community, someone with lived experience, or simply here to learn more about making a difference, this episode is sure to provide valuable insights and real-world advice. So get ready to be inspired, to be educated, and to be motivated to engage in what matters most. Conversations that are not just necessary, but they're life-changing. Before we jump into today's conversation, I want to share a quick note with you all. Registration is now open for the 2024 Montana Summer Institute. Yes, registration is open. And this year's theme is expanding the circle, creating space for hope, health, and connection. That right there just makes me want to go. But I do absolutely love this event. It is a fantastic opportunity to meet like-minded professionals and pioneers in the field. You can engage in workshops that are not only informative, but they're truly transformational. So I want to invite you all to join us in Big Sky, Montana, or online via the live stream to learn how to foster hope, cultivate health, and strengthen connections to build a healthier, safer, and more positive communities for all. For more information and to register, visit montanainstitute.com. Okay, let's get started with our conversation with Susie. All right, podcast listeners, we are back for another episode of the Prevention Leaders Podcast. And just like I said during the introduction, this is going to be a great one. I've got Susie Reece here with me. Susie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
We have been playing email tag for probably 4 or 5 months now. But I'm so glad to actually get to sit down and chat with you. Before we really get into the work that you are doing that is ever so important and inspiring too. I mean, just our little pre-recording chat, I'm already intrigued and inspired and want to know more. But could you tell us a little bit about sort of who you are, what you do, and I'm curious too, what led to you working in your current role?
Yeah, I think the best way to start is actually with what led, because that tends to, it happened so early in my life that it reframed everything for me. But um, I lost my dad when I was 10 years old to suicide. And that's such a harsh thing to start off with to say, but it's such a reality for so many folks these days that I know that someone out there is going to be thinking, I've experienced something like this. So my dad had been in the military and he had served for more than 20 years and he had started going through retirement. And there were all of these other elements of challenge and life change that were happening all at once that really impacted what happened with his life and essentially what happened with mine. And so for me, at the time we were living in Washington, D.C., my father was stationed at Fort Myers. He was in the Old Guard. And essentially what happened was I became a ward of the military, and they decided at that point that they needed to find someone in my family who could adopt me. So I was brought to Arkansas, which is where I live now, and my father's parents ended up adopting me. And when I think about just the shift culturally from living in Washington, D.C. to coming to a very small rural community where I was the Asian person being raised by elderly grandparents who were 50 years older than me and very white, it was just an interesting kind of experience on so many levels because you've got this underlying loss that's really just splintering out through everything. And then there are these elements of where do I fit? And also this consistent kind of shying away from conversation. So people would, you know, have questions like, how did you adopt her? Why do you have this little Korean girl? And it's such an awkward conversation every time, especially with a stranger. So you just see people kind of pull into themselves or back away or kind of shy away from that dialogue. And as a child, you don't always understand it's not you, it's the subject. And so for a long time, I really struggled with is it is it my face? Is it my skin? Is it, what they're talking about? Like, what is the thing that's making people pull away from me? So that was essentially what really led me into the work that I do. So I've been doing suicide prevention work for 10 years now, professionally, I say, because I've really been doing it my whole life. But it was that not understanding that curiosity around what's the thing that's making them feel as though they can't lean in, feel as though that they can't connect, feel as though they have to watch what they say. And of course, we all know now how complex suicide is and how there's so much stigma. And of course, that impacts our conversations and what we do and say. But it was a driving force for me because it wasn't just a loss that significantly shifted my life. It was also this new trajectory of exploring who I am in the context of suicide. Because whether I liked it or not, everyone saw me in that light. So, I started getting into this space and I've just been very vocal my entire, professional and even before that career around suicide and the need to have these conversations and how it impacts people. And I've seen how we have this dialogue completely shift over the years from this absolute resistance to more of a hesitation to more people stepping in and saying, I have an experience that is my own, but has shared elements to yours. Like maybe we can connect around this. So, that's kind of how I got here. And then what drives me is just trying to understand what I can about it. I know that I'll never completely understand it because it is so complicated. But in the legacy of my life, being able to connect with others and help them understand that it's okay to have this conversation. Nobody has to enjoy it. We're not expecting anyone to want to dive in. But these are difficult conversations that we need to have, just like any other difficult conversation in our lives.
They're conversations that matter. They're conversations that make a difference. They're conversations that can change, can save a life. So hell yeah, let's have them. Yeah, absolutely. And I got to admit, just in the couple minutes when you were sharing what led you to your role in the work that you do, my throat got tight. I got this lump in my throat, this tension in my body, and just got very fidgety because I just trying to even begin. Like, I've been working on a presentation where I'm sharing my story of coming back from combat and the working through the trauma, the post-traumatic stress, anxiety, the drinking, the depression, and so many of the things that I was talking about, the not feeling like I fit in, not feeling like I belong, feeling so different, and the blame and the shame that I put on myself for that, and just what that felt like. Like, that's where you took me when you were sharing, and just like you said, the connections, the commonalities in our connection points in different stories, though none are the same. There are those elements, and oh yeah. So I just had a moment there during your introduction. Oh my goodness. Focus, Dave. Um, I would though, I'm curious, moving to Arkansas and asking yourself, is it the color of your skin? Is it, your upbringing, like your grandparents and the challenges you faced there? What are a couple things that, as you reflect back that, helps you thrive, succeed, grow? Where are those positive nuggets there that really built you up?
I hate to say it, I think stubbornness.
Don't say that. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if I have to be honest with all of the strangers that are listening right now, that's probably the one nugget. I think when you're in the middle of struggle, you don't necessarily see a way out, especially when it's new. We know what resilience is. It's something that's built over time that we begin to understand, and that you have those habits or those strategies. And early in life, I was just, trying to claw my way through whatever. So I think I think part of it was just this. I have always had this mentality of why,
Mhm.
why. And so if I was told I couldn't do something, I wanted to understand. And as some may imagine, growing up during the time that I did with older grandparents who were from a completely different generation, we weren't allowed to ask questions. We weren't allowed to ask why. You just did what you were supposed to
Mhm.
do. And so it almost stifled that curiosity and that need to understand. And it's more of a drive because if something isn't working, I know we can do better. I know we can fix it. So for me, it was quieted for a very long time. And then at some point in adulthood, I remember thinking, I'm an adult. There's not a lot of privileges to that. Let's be honest. But I
Yeah.
can now do so many things that I couldn't do when I was a child. People don't necessarily, they don't have the control over me like they used to. And so that curiosity became to me, it's a driving force of why are we doing this the way that we are? Or why are we not doing this the way that we are? Say we are or should, all of those things. So I think for me, it was just trying to better understand. And, that's definitely a theme in the experience around suicide, because for so long it was just a non-versation. I stole that from Modern Family. Something we didn't talk about, you don't talk about it.
Mhm.
And so it became something I owned to a degree that's off-putting to some. But at the same time, when we are so repelled by something, there's something internal going on within us that's driving us away from it. So I think that was a big part of it. And then as I've gotten older, you get to a point where, especially in my life, I've lost a sibling, I've lost my father, I've lost close friends at a relatively young age, that you know that you can get through.
Mm.
And earlier in life, I didn't see that pass. It was just, this is the struggle, this is forever. And at this point now, it's like, oh, it's Tuesday. This bad thing happened. I'll be fine.
Mhm.
It's gonna suck for a while, but I can manage through it.
Mm. That is one of the lessons that I learned from my military service, is the ability to embrace the suck and drive on. Yes, and I I already picked up on your curiousness. You're a thinker and you like to ask questions, but you're on my podcast, so I get to ask the questions here. No,
No questions for me. Got it.
just kidding. This is conversation, a very important conversation, because I want to talk about, your work around lived experience that, having been in the prevention field for many years, seeing the focus on lived experience, the voices of lived experience being encouraged to come to the table and given a seat at the table, so to speak, more and more. I want to know about the work that you're doing as it relates to lived experience. I know all
Well,
the
I could
things.
talk about this all day, so you'll have to cut me off at some point. I don't quite understand still how I got the opportunity to do what I'm doing. So essentially, there's a national entity that develops best practices around suicide prevention, and they began a lived experience advisory committee in around 20, I think it was 2021, early 2021, and I was one of the individuals that was asked to sit on this committee. And I remember like we were all still reeling from COVID, you know? I was like I was like, what's normal at this point? What can I do? Uh, and my life was completely upended during COVID because I had just in 2019 decided I was gonna do consulting and go out and venture out into on my own and do a lot of public speaking, which there was no publics.
Right?
So that plan
Mhm.
didn't quite work out. And so I was asked to sit on this committee. And I remember thinking, is this a good use of my time? You know, I've got to get my feet back underneath me. I need to get some momentum. Quite honestly, I need to make some money right now. Like, what am I signing up for?
Mhm.
And I remember really just thinking, I don't know about this. And it's funny. So I ended up agreeing and I sat in a couple of the meetings and I was still unsure of where it was going to go. And eventually I was asked if I was interested in contracting to start building out the work around this committee and build out essentially an entire program for this organization. And I remember whenever I was asked, I was thinking, okay, you know, this is interesting, but is this what I want to do? And what does this actually mean? And of course, I had no idea what that would look like. So I took the contract and I became employed through this organization, which is where I'm at now. And it has been such a journey of really blending the passionate piece of the work that I was doing before with the need for best practices and the need for actually being informed by evidence and showing why these things need to be done the way that they are. But I never envisioned years ago that this is the exact kind of work I would be doing. I always brought myself into the work and I always, you know, incorporated who I am as a person. But there's some element of separation that's almost expected in professional spaces. And so I think mentally I had kind of resigned myself to if I want to be accepted, I need to put the business suit on and I need to, you know, pretend I'm an adult and do all of these things, you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's been such a phenomenal experience to first have been selected to sit on a committee with individuals who are international level experts, but then to be allowed to drive this work, not only for this organization, but really for the field in such a meaningful way. And it's been one lesson after another because we do have a lot of frameworks, we have a lot of guidance in the work, but there's so much that's left to be desired when it comes to like the practicality of it. You know, it's
Mhm.
like, oh, you know, you should incorporate experiences in every effort. But there's no like book. There's no blueprint. There's no how do you actually make that happen? How do you
Mhm.
operationalize it? So I've been trying to figure that out and create it in such a way that people like me and you are proud to be involved and we feel like we're being treated just as anyone else and
Mhm.
that we aren't, you know, just the person that says consumer under their name somewhere. Because we've all had that experience. We've all had the experience where, oh, you're the person with lived experience. Well, your experience is different than ours because we read a book and you can't possibly understand, this thing the way that we do. And we all know that that's just incorrect.
I may have clenched my fist like, oh, hell no. Hey, folks, just a quick break to tell you about an exciting collaboration between the Prevention Leaders podcast and Wired Biohealth. Wired Biohealth has crafted a special package just for our listeners interested in exploring the genetic basis behind their behavioral health. This offer includes 50% off of their epigenetic kit, free shipping in the US, a complimentary virtual review of your biomarker evaluation report with a Wired Biohealth consultant, and a free 60-minute follow-up session. Now imagine gaining personalized insights from a simple cheek swab that empowers you to make informed decisions about your wellness. Now, I know I've mentioned on past episodes about my journey with them over the last year, and y'all, it has been a game changer in all aspects of my life. So I invite you to check out wiredbiohealth.com and mention my name, Dave Closson, to grab this exclusive deal for you all, the listeners of the Prevention Leaders podcast. Now, let's get back to our episode. Sidebar, side note, my own personal journey evolving in the professional field, I too felt like I had to put on the business suit, all that stuff. But that also just was like a layer of weight sitting on top of my anxiety, my stress, because I couldn't be authentically me. And I'm now to that point where I can throw all that out the window and show up in a t-shirt and hoodie. Like, I'm Dave Closson. If you're not going to respect me or take my word with any credit, then I don't need to be around you. It's all good. To the point where I now wear t-shirts with little sayings on them where they substituted the word day for Dave. So what a difference a Dave can make. A Dave to remember. Just another Dave in paradise. Because I'm just Dave, man. I'm just Dave. Yeah, okay, Dave. Back to the conversation. Having, been that lived experience person at the table, but then also not been invited to certain tables, even when I raised my hand and was like, y'all, like, that's me. You want me to, can I be a part of this project? And being sort of dismissed too, that kind of felt weird too. Have you felt or seen that the, in air quotes, lived experience individuals have been kind of like exploited even in more recent times now?
Well, I think historically, yes. I mean, so I've had the saying for a little while now that people with lived experience, especially substance use, suicide, these types of experiences, we are a marginalized community. We have been ostracized. We have had so many things happen to where we've not been welcomed into spaces or environments, or our insights are not the same, held to the same level. So yes, and I think it's happened across fields and disciplines. I mean, if you look at research, for example, if you look at qualitative research, what is a qualitative study built on? Interviews, interviewing people, and then when do we include those individuals? Only for the interview. That's it. I'm gonna interview you for an hour. I'm gonna write a paper on it. I'm gonna get it published. It's gonna help me maintain my career. Thank you, and that's it. And so that in itself is a type of exploitation. I mean, there's so many conversations around, well, it's unethical to compensate folks for being a part of research because you're going to bias it. Yeah, you have research types like autoethnography, for example. That's completely driven by the researcher and their experiences. And how is that less credible than other types of information? So, I think there's that. And then you have spaces. How many of us have had some type of fundraiser event where we were asked to share a story for something
Mhm.
so that a nonprofit or a group could make money?
Mhm.
And that was it. That was our involvement. Who's really earning the money for that though?
Mhm.
And I think that we have to consider how we do that. I'm not saying that we can't continue to include individuals with lived experience when we don't have the ability to compensate them, but we need to be transparent about those things. We need to
Mhm.
ensure that they're getting some type of benefit out of it. And we for sure need to make sure they understand the consequences of sharing a very intimate and personal story publicly that they cannot retract, that they cannot delete, that they cannot edit. Because once it's out there, that is a part of how you are viewed. And
Mhm.
I think too often we don't really take that into account and what that means for that person, whether it be their how they see themselves, how their immediate, social sphere sees them, and how they interact with the world around them. If you share the wrong story, that affects your ability to get a job somewhere.
Mhm.
So I think it's really important that we put more thought and practice into how we are including and engaging individuals. And I think a key part of that is ensuring that those people are driving the work.
Tell me more about that. Driving the work.
Yeah, I get to do that.
Right? I know you
It's
already mentioned
very
it once.
I know. I mean, I love what the work that I'm doing. So, driving the work looks different depending on what you're trying to accomplish and what your mission is and what your organization or group is what their working style is and products that they're creating, things like that. So for us, we develop best practices, and so that looks like content of all types across disciplines, across audiences, and so for us, ensuring that individuals with lived experience are really inserted into whatever projects and that they have a level of influence. Now, some projects, depending on whatever you're working on, you may have less ability to influence a project. I mean, we've all been on stuff where someone's like, "Does this look good to you?" And you get to say yes. And that's the extent
That's
of
all you
it.
get to say.
That's
Yep.
it. That don't say no. Like, but we've also been on stuff that we've had our hands all over, and it has completely reshaped what that project looks like because you can see your fingerprints all throughout something. And there's a sense of pride in that work too. You have a sense of ownership. So I think, how we drive the work looks different based on what the work is and what's reasonable. Sometimes we have things come through that we just don't have time to do more on, but ideally, you're looking at there's two essential concepts. One is called co-design, where technical experts who are most likely employed through whatever organization or entity are working alongside individuals with lived experience. And we've done some work around, how should lived experience people be included within entities. We actually find that because of internal power dynamics, a lot of times it's better for them to be external to the organization if they can be, because then, you're not my boss. I, I don't have to say the thing because this is how I feel. This is my truth, right?
Mhm.
And you're still going to compensate me for my time and you can't fire me essentially, which is fantastic. I mean, obviously you want to vet folks, but um, that it gives them an element of control over how they give feedback, and it encourages authenticity. It ensures that when Dave shows up, that he's
Mhm.
not Dave wearing a business suit that feels like he can't talk. So there's a piece of that, but those two individuals, that internal person and that external lived experience leader, work throughout the process of that project on every phase together, and they share power throughout. So that if you and I are working on a project and we disagree, we spend intentional time really looking at evaluating and determining what is needed here. And sometimes that means you win
Mhm.
because the lived experience perspective takes precedent over everything else. So, that's the concept of co-design. And then live led is where individuals with lived experience are leading it. We're driving the work. We are trusted. We are seen as equals in professional spaces because we have expertise beyond just that experience. We have expertise that's really built into our, how we view things and how we are shaping the work. So for me, that looks like designing a program like this to ensure that there's accountability, to ensure that there's outcomes, but to also ensure that every type of perspective is valued and that if people disagree, that's fine, that's normal, that's natural, but that we can come to an agreed upon conclusion that works for everyone. That's really going to meet the needs of the work for those we're trying to serve.
Beautiful. And jives so well with what are a couple pillars that I've been lifting up and supporting and driving home. And one of those is reframing the prevention leader's mindset of one moving away from the traditional hierarchical leadership, top-down approach to a facilitative leader. And that as the quote leader, I'm going to bring the process, but the wisdom is in the room. The wisdom is within the team. Here's, step 1, 2, and 3 that are designed to bring out that wisdom, to bring that group together in consensus. So the group creates the action plan or implementation plan and so forth. And the power is in the process. The wisdom is in the room. Absolutely. You've got to create space for it. Yes. Oh, I like it. I like it. I like it. What would you say though so I want to kind of shift a little bit because I do have a decent amount of followers, friends that are both veterans and first responders. What kind of work are you doing in that arena?
Oh, well, well, again, we could talk about that for a while. So I've done quite a bit of work. I've done less work over the past year and a half in that space because of my new role, but I've helped for years. So that's been really a passionate area for me, in part because of my father and his service. But then, as you know, there's just a community there. There's just a welcoming and openness and support system that you can't quite describe to others who don't understand. And it's one space where I've always felt accepted, even though I'm kind of goofy and awkward and different. It's just a space where, I've felt that connection. So I've always tried to give back, and especially for veterans. I've done a great deal of work, in particular on suicide prevention, crisis intervention. I've built out content around crisis intervention. So not quite the Memphis model, something a bit unique, but it's got some of the core elements of what you would look at around that as far as like the community piece and just different things. So I think a lot of it is just conversations around these things that we're experiencing or that others don't feel like the conversations have been really directed at them. I think that sometimes we talk at people or we have this false sense that they're at the table, but they're not really showing up like we've talked about already. And so the work is kind of deprived. So in particular, I can't even tell you how many projects I've worked on where they'll say SMVF and I'll say, well, where's the F at? And they'll say, well,
Right.
spouse. Yeah. They'll say, we've got some spouses here. And I'm like, what about the children? What about the children who have been impacted? Oh, well, we don't know any of them. And I'm thinking, well, why is there an F there?
Right.
Why are we saying these things when we're not really representing what we're claiming to? So in part advocating for that because I'm the child of a veteran who's died from suicide. I should be sought after for this type of work. I should be, considered. And I can't tell you how many times that's not happened. I've been overlooked for whatever reason because my view is different. And that's not to say that that type of experience has the same impact or, need as the direct veteran, but it's no less important in the scope of the work that we're doing. So I think, it just depends on what day it is and who I'm talking to. I mean, I have such a passion around these conversations and really bringing them back to what I've seen and experienced in a way that I hope is relatable to others. Because at the end of the day, the radio announcements, the quick clips and the things, and then we're just like, who was involved in this message or whatever it was? And you turn the channel, or you're thinking, I don't even listen to radio in the car anymore, But there's so many conversations that are being had where we've got that limited view. And to me, it's important to consistently advocate and say, I'm not the only one that's experienced this. I mean, if we have as many veterans dying by suicide a day as we claim, tell me how many of those are leaving children behind and how it's completely destroying years of their lives, if not their entire life. So I think it's important, just the advocating alone, to recognize that.
So just before we jumped on to record, I was with a couple of my teammates working on a 3-workshop series for the SMVF audience around prevention. And I think you might appreciate the fact that the second 3-hour block of content is all focused on the F. All on the F. All on the families, the military-connected families and youth. Because, yes, they get overlooked. And I look to my niece and nephew, brother-in-law just retired from the Navy, the moves, the challenges, the struggles, the stressors, the risk factors, but daggone, they're resilient. They are oh so resilient and tough. They've got that, you call it stubbornness, I call it grit. But
we can call it whatever we need to.
Right. Absolutely. Well, we've been chatting for a bit, but I wanna touch on 2 last sort of topics before we hit stop record. And the first one being positive messaging, positive communication. I told you before that, one of the things that gets me really riled up is all of the problem-focused messaging that we see out there, and how, as for the veteran audience, it just makes me feel like part of the problem. Yep, okay, I'm part of the problem, and just dismiss it. It doesn't encourage me to do any sort of help-seeking behavior. So what can you tell us about the power of positive messaging?
Oh, there's so many thoughts I've got right now. I think sometimes the way that I look at the framework of what you just mentioned is like name calling. We're being called names a lot. Nobody wants that.
Right.
So, I love positive messaging and communication, and there's so much to it that is really important. And I think what I see as far as messaging and communication, they're not always the same thing, and it's odd to me. But I think messaging wise, it's incorporating people with experiences and how we communicate, because we know that we don't all talk the same. We might all speak the same language, but we're not all saying things in the same ways. And so, I'm going to speak differently right now than I am with my friend that I've been friends with for 30 years. In fact, we probably shouldn't record any of what I say. I say with our, because of lots of reasons. But there's just that element of nuance in how we see ourselves, how we communicate. And sometimes a generic phrase is just not enough. It doesn't hit home. And I think sometimes in certain spaces, it's just easy to do that, to have the one thing and go from there. So for me, positive communication, it always starts with, who is helping to shape this and how, and then making sure that it's for the right audience. Like if you're talking to veterans, making sure that you're using things and language that resonates with them. You wouldn't want to talk to them in the same way that you would teachers or nurses, for example. You want, because just like when I was talking about suck and you said embrace the suck. That's language that everyone in that space is going to understand and think, yeah, I don't know how many times I've had to say that.
Right.
So it works. But beyond just the basics of including folks, I think it's also in how we do things. The model of positive communication is a really good framework, and it's really simple. There's 7 elements. The first one is greeting, just how we start an interaction with another person. Another one is asking. So asking allows us to know others in deeper ways. Through this conversation, you asking questions, you're getting to learn more about me that you didn't know before. So are all of the people that are listening. And there's so much power in just the way that we ask questions. And yet we don't always do that in meaningful ways. It's like, I've had a long day. Someone walks up, oh, how's your day going? Good.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. There's those stock responses. But there's other things too around that particular model. So you've got like disclosing how we share. When we share things that are more authentic, people want to reciprocate that. People want to share in turn. There's just a natural reciprocity that happens. So if you're more open and you're more willing to be yourself, others are going to tend to, want to do that in response. But if we're like, oh, I'm busy, I don't have time, and this is our normal response, eventually all of our interactions get cut short because that's what's our norm. And then listening. And I love it when we talk about listening or active listening and things, because it's like, how do you know someone's listening? You're like, oh, they're nodding their head. But there's actually different types of listening. There's so much more to listening than what we often really look at. You've got empathic listening where you're just there. You are just present with someone. You are just letting them, vent or experience or share. And there's no expectation of problem solving. There's no expectation of anything. You're just simply in front of that person. And so I think it's important for us to understand that certain types of listening are important in certain spaces and for certain needs. And there's more to listening, and I could talk about that for a while. And then you have, I'm going to have to actually think. So let me see. One of the final ones is inspiring. So the way that you show up in the world with your Dave shirts, other folks are like, I want to be like Dave. I want a shirt. I don't want to wear a business suit. Why am I doing this? But how we are modeling who we are, people are watching this all the time. You have such an influence right now. You've got a podcast that people are listening to. Whoever's listening has an influence on the world around them and how they show up in the day. People either want to gravitate towards you or they want to pull away. So all of these ways of just being a person in our day to day are really, that's how you model positive communication. And if you're adopting practices as simple as these, then it's going to show up in your work, and it's going to show up in, really meaningful places like suicide prevention or substance use prevention. And I think it's really important to simplify and remember that it doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be, some long drawn out thing with these words that no one can pronounce. It can be easy, and it can be fun, and it can be something that brings us closer to others.
I want to just rewind and hit play all over again because that was some beautiful wisdom. And I know we talked about what it looks like in action. And so I'm just going to share my story on how I'm doing little things that are in alignment with that. And one of them that I've been intentional about now is you jump in Zoom and you do the, hey, how you doing? How's it going? The check-in question, but it's like you're saying, very stock answers, right? I've been leaning into those and like, well, actually, let me tell you, I'm just a little bit tired today. Yeah. Or, oh my gosh, I've been running meeting to meeting. I'm feeling a little scattered, little overextended. Just putting it out there. Like it's okay. Like, why do we have to be so scripted? So just tell it how it is. Like if they're really there and they care, then they want to know, right? Oh yes, can be so simple. But at the same time, it'd be kind of scary because, I need to wear a business suit and got to be formal and yeah. But part of the reason it makes it easy for me is because it's an excuse to bring up my daughter.
Which is fun too, though. But I mean,
Right.
that's disclosing, that's letting people know a little bit about you.
Mm-hmm.
And then they tend to be more gracious too. I mean, if someone knows that you haven't been sleeping well.
Yeah. Like, oh, you've been up since 3 a.m. Oh my goodness. Another thing too that I like to do, so I do a little culture work with prevention leaders, and I talk about culture is the strategy. You want to be intentional about the culture you're creating within your team, within your community, and how, as a prevention leader, if you work in prevention, you're a prevention leader, by the way. There's a little asterisk next to that. If you work in prevention, you're trying to lead, facilitate, inspire positive change. So you're leading. You don't have to have a title. But I talk about how you've got to live by example if you want to lead by example. It's that modeling. And the book, The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, talks about the good apple and the bad apple experiment that they did, where they had a group of, I want to say, marketing students come in, and they had to create a marketing plan for a makeshift startup business. But within that group, there was a paid actor, and that paid actor was paid to play different roles so they could study the impact or the influence of that single individual on the culture of that group. And there was one group that was the outlier, where it didn't matter what role, whether he was a jerk, if he was the downer like Eeyore, just putting his head down, checking out, if he was dismissive, didn't matter what he did. One group stood out. And it's because one individual, whenever the actor would try to derail the project, one individual would simply redirect. He would make the situation safe, take the tension out of the room, and then open it back up to the group. Well, what do others think about that? But that one person wasn't a leader. They didn't have a title, but they were able to positively influence the culture. So how you show up, just like you were saying, how you show up in your day-to-day, how you show up on a random Tuesday morning at 9:35 can make a difference in somebody's life. It can make a difference in your team culture. Absolutely. How you show up. So, folks, listeners, are the ways you're showing up positively influencing the culture, the lives of those around you, or not? Yeah. So I could ask you questions all day. I would love to go back to the lived experience work, talking about the model of positive messaging. And instead, though, I'm going to say, let's have some future conversations. So before we part, I'm going to ask two more questions. I may have said three earlier, but I'm going with two right now because, hey, I'm the host. I can ask what I want. What I heard you talking about throughout is that we often tell people what they need to do. Hey, you need to do suicide prevention. We tell them why it's important. Hey, this is why it's important. You also go do this. But the gap that you're focused on filling is the how. How do we go about doing that work? So what might be a few tips or strategies for the prevention leaders that are listening on how they can go about engaging, working with, lifting up the voices and valuing the voices of those with lived experience?
Wow, that's a great question. So I think first is really some self-evaluation. What does your work look like and how are you showing up to it? But also, what does your network look like? If you're only working with other folks who are paid to be there and you don't have anyone and you're constantly last minute trying to do outreach to find someone for something because you don't know anyone, why is that? That's a reflection of something going on, whether it be that you don't have time to build relationships or it's not been a priority. I mean, it's something. So I think, we have to understand that the whole the whole work of suicide prevention is around relationships.
Mhm.
It's very much relationships, and we can't really be effective if we don't have strong ties to others who are also in this space in some way. So I think looking at who's in your network, how you reach out to them and how you include them in things. And then, other tips as far as the work goes, there is no one answer. There are plenty of things that show us what not to do. There's plenty of evidence, there's plenty of science. Looking for best practices is very important, but also acknowledging that some of the strategies that we're using, some of the information that we're using is dated. It's not current. It's not what we should be doing, especially around lived experience. can do so much more, and we can do it so much better than what we've done in the past because we simply don't have enough focus or haven't had enough focus in that space. So I think kind of looking at, are you current on the information that you're using? Where are you getting your information from? And there's plenty of free places. You shouldn't have to pay for too much somewhere. There's so much information out there. So making sure that we know that we're incorporating those best practices and looking to the leaders in these spaces that are modeling the things that we want to incorporate as well. And then just recognizing, like, you have to take care of yourself. This work is exhausting. It is difficult, and it doesn't often show us the rewards. If you're preventing suicide, we're not seeing those numbers. We're not seeing the people that are still alive that might not have been because we weren't doing the work. So it's really important to create wins for yourself, to take care of yourself, and really to have that support network that you can lean into of people that you can trust and say, it's been a really crap week. Can we just chat? Can we just talk about this? Let me get this off my chest. And I'm lucky enough to have so many people that I can turn to and just be myself with that, we have vaults and everything else where it's like, once it goes into the vault, it doesn't come out, whatever it is, because that's how you take care of folks.
Absolutely. And listeners, if you don't feel you have somebody you can just call and vent when you are feeling overextended, overwhelmed, there is 988, and there will also be some links in the show notes here for you to get connected with some resources, some folks that you can talk to as well. Wonderful list of tips and strategies. But I feel like you can handle a challenge. So I'm going to throw a challenge your way. From that list and or anything we've talked about today, if you were to narrow that down to one nugget of wisdom for our listeners to take away, if they're going to remember one single thing from our conversation, what would you want that thing to be?
I think however you need to show up in these spaces is how you deserve to show up in these spaces. And that if anyone else has expectations of you that are different from what feels right, they're not your people. So I hope that whoever's doing this work does it to the full extent that they're capable as themselves at all times.
And with that final word of wisdom there, thank you for your time, for chatting, for connecting with me. We didn't just talk, we connected. And I thank you for that. So grateful. And also, keep on doing the work that you are doing and let me know how I can help further your mission, advance your mission as well, because you know how I roll. Prevention is better together. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
That concludes this episode. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and share this episode with a friend before you leave. And we look forward to seeing you on social media because prevention is better together. Together, we are stronger.